Okay, I think you should see my slides right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start. First of all, few words about me. My name is Riccardo. I'm a business intelligence and Power BI engineer. I work for the Italian Lucient branch. So I'm talking to you from the north of Italy right now. So thank you for having me. Thank you for joining us. I'm working in the data realm for more than 10 years right now. I'm trying to give my little contribution to the data community around these topics. You can find me both as a speaker and an organizer or an attendee in many data-based event. So you can find me in Data Saturdays, SQL Saturdays, or you can find me in Power BI user group site and so on. And today I can also add another stamp to my jersey. I've talked for my first time to a dataMinds event. So thank you very much to all the organizers for these great events. I see a very huge agenda also for the next few weeks. So thank you again for having me. Just a very a short agenda about what we are going to talk about. Just an information, this is not going to be a 100 level session. It could be at the very beginning, but we are going to leave the 100 level very soon during the session. So I'm not going to tell you how to install a data gateway for Power BI. I know probably you already know it. It's something more related to why and what to monitor when we are having something to do with Power BI and on-premises data gateway. And we will talk about if there's something out of the box about this topic. So if we can leverage something that already exists, or if we have to do everything from scratch. And then obviously I will show you what we have done on this topic. So 100 levels. So let's do a very brief overview of what is a data gateway and why we are working with this object, with this software. So typical scenario that probably many of you have already seen. We have some data sources that are in our on-premises LAN, for example, and we attach to them a Power BI desktop application, and we build some fantastic reports that get many thumbs up from our boss, and everything works smoothly. But what happens when we decide to publish this content from our Power BI desktop to the service? So we are moving a content outside from our local area network, and we are publishing it on a service. So obviously, missing a bridge from our local area network and the cloud service, what happens? It is that our report won't refresh correctly. So our data are freezed to the last publish, and we cannot refresh. So this is a typical scenario. So how we can solve this? We simply put again our on-premises source on the left, our services on the right, and we put something in the middle. In the middle, we put a software that is called on-premises data gateway. And it's pretty simple the way it works. It talks with our software, our sources, and then thanks to an Azure Service Bus instance, it sends the data to the Power BI service. And in this way, our reports can be refreshed both manually or in a scheduled way. If we use the scheduler, so we schedule something, two other services are instantiated behind the scene for us. And it means that we will have a refresh scheduler service that calls a data movement service that instantiate an entry in an Azure Service Bus queue that is polled by on-premises data gateway. And our report again can be refreshed without any problem. As you can see, there are some, let me switch on the laser just to point out something. As you can see, we have some arrows that goes back and forth and arrows that follow just one direction. And this is very important because the Azure Service Bus that manage the refresh queues, it's just polled by on-premises data gateway, and it doesn't push anything to our on-premises data gateway. And it is important from a security perspective because we don't have to open any inbound ports when we have to install an on-premises data gateway. So you will find that we have two gateway types. We can install both standard and on-personal mode gateways. Very easy to understand that the standard mode is something that is an enterprise solution. So you are going to install this if you want to leverage your reports in an enterprise view. And the personal mode instead, it's something that it's more like something that you are going to use on your own. According to the different type of gateway that you install, you can use the gateway for specific applications. So the personal mode only supports Power BI. The standard mode enables you to use it also for Logic App, for example, Power Up and Power Automate. And another difference is the standard mode obviously support all the storage mode, so you can use it for import mode and direct query, for example, and you can schedule the refresh. On the other hand, the personal mode only supports import mode. And again, it's pretty simple to see that if you are in an enterprise, you are going to use this standard mode. If you are testing or you are in a specific scenario where you are, for example, using R and Python scripts in your ETL, in your Power Query, you are going to use the personal mode. From a security perspective, your architecture, and sometimes you have to know these details when you are talking with customers or when you are talking with IT departments that ask for security when they have to install something in their local area network. So you have to know that anytime you store credentials to access data sources, they are stored locally and in the Power BI service. They are encrypted while they are stored, so this is not a problem from a security perspective. And again, as you remember the previous slide with the arrows, there's no inbound ports because there's no the gateway is polling from the queue, so there's no inbound port to open. And this is important from a security perspective again. Some considerations, some best practice that you should keep in mind when you work with the gateway, obviously, is not to lose the recovery keys, because it's fundamental when you have to do some migration, if you have to take over, or if you have to do some recovery, and so on. Another consideration, maybe best practice, is not to install both versions on the same machine. I know it's possible, but it's not a good practice, a best practice. So simply do not install both type of gateways on the same server. Sometimes you could need to have some two gateways or more gateways in your local area network. For example, if you have some if you need to use the R and Python scripts that need a personal mode of the gateway, and if you have other ETL process, other Power Query processes, and in that case you will have both personal and enterprise, maybe probably installed in two different machines. Or again, if you have two different Active Directory or two different domains in your as sources, so you will have two different gateways. So in some scenarios, you could end up having multiple gateways. And if you have some, you should consider that a gateway could become your single point of failure in some cases. So there's an high availability option for enabled by that could be enabled that can give you the possibility to design an high availability cluster for the gateway, distributing the load in a round robin approach, or balancing the load according to which server is more free to do some work. Oh, and obviously you have two different applications that you can use in order to understand which is the state of your gateways, which is the level of patching, and so on. Other things that we are going to see something, for example, on the on-premise data gateway app. And you have also some PowerShell commandlets that you can use to manage. Okay, so we have done a very quick overview of a gateway and some options, some details about the gateway, but we are going to leave the 100 level as I told you. So we probably understand that the gateway it's important in our solution, but why? So let's go back to our previous slide, and we see our architecture. So we have reports published on the service, and we have data sources that are on premises. And it becomes very, it's clear that we have something to care, because we can have a premium capacity, very powerful premium capacity on the service, and we could have very performant SQL Server data warehouse or tabular models, well designed with a spectacular DAX functions and so on. But everything must be treated through the on-premises data gateway in an architecture like this. So it means that we should care about monitoring and doing a monitoring strategy upon our data gateway. But what we can monitor about a gateway? In reality, we have many things to monitor. We have many topics that we can analyze when we have to talk about our gateway. First of all, the gateway is installed in a virtual machine typically, or anyway, it's installed on a server. Virtual or physical, it's installed on a server. So the first thing that we can consider is to analyze the pressure on the resources of our gateway. So very easily, if we have correctly done capacity plan on the workload that we are going to support with our gateway, if we have, for example, enough amount of RAM, enough CPUs to support the workload that we are supporting with our gateway. And this is the first thing that we could analyze. Then we can also analyze the volume of queries that we are supporting. And most of the time, we know that we have installed the Power BI gateway, an on-premises data gateway. And we know there are some reports in the company, we know that we started maybe with a pilots of 1 to 10 reports, but if the product is as success in our company, probably 10 reports become 100, and obviously the volume of queries change a lot. So we have to analyze the volume of queries we are supporting, the length maybe of the queries. So if we are affected by queries that take more time than expected to complete, for example, and if we have some patterns in the query distribution, for example, if we have many queries in a specific period, in a specific some specific hours of our working day, or if, for example, we have peaks during the night or peaks during the weekend, maybe because we run our workload out of working hours, for example. And obviously we want to track errors, because probably you have already tried to look at the errors that you receive when a dataset gives an error, and you have to open that spectacular portal of Power BI, and you see the errors in a very small window. It's not so easy to read the errors, and you cannot track a lot the errors if you are not extracting them from somewhere. So this is more or less what we can what we could be interested to track. Maybe there's something more, but this is something we can start with. So this is a set of questions that we had with with one of our customer, a big customer. It's a Denmark bank, and for them we installed an on-premises data gateway supporting not too much reports, but very heavy. So we started smoothly, but with an amount of data that was growing, we started suffering some errors in the refresh, and we started asking. We had been asked by the customer which was the reason behind those errors, and it was clear that we should start creating something in order to understand what was happening behind the scenes. So we started wondering if there's an out-of-the-box monitoring system for the on-premise data gateway, because I think it's a quite common scenario. It's a quite common question. So we started looking at what we have out of the box. And if you open up the on-premises data gateway app that is installed by default on every on-premises data gateway, you will see that there's an export logs button here. That is something that gives you exactly a zip file with all the logs that the gateway pick up by default for you. So behind the scene, there's a logging system, very detailed logging system that you can access looking at these export logs and having the zip file. To be honest, you have to study a little bit to understand all the kind of logs. So this is a table where I tried to summarize which is the file pattern name of specific logs that you are going to find in that zip. So they are specific. Each file pattern corresponds to a specific type of log, and each log obviously contains different information. We will see together in a demo which is the content, but just to give you a spoiler, the system counter aggregation report gives you a detailed information about the system resources that you have in a specific amount of time. So you will set up the amount of time doing the aggregation, and you will see which is the resource like CPU and RAM allocated to the gateway service and so on in a specific moment. And you will get also some specific report about query execution. So you will get the list of query that had been run on a specific gateway server. And plus many more other information like tests on the network, errors about the gateway, port tests if you do this, and so on. The first problem that you will see is that these logs could be located in different location by default. So you can find them in different location, and you can define where to store them. So for example, you can decide where to store these first 4 logging files, changing the default that is contained in this file, config file, that you can find in this installation folder for on-premise data gateway. So after you have identified which are the logs important for you, you have to understand where they are located. And from my perspective, the best practice that you can implement when you work with on-premise data gateway is that you should select a custom folder to put all the logs from the day one. So you install the gateway and then you configure a custom folder to put all the logs by default, changing the default. In this way, you will get all the logs in a specific folder that you manage, and you can point to have to get information out. So this is, as you can see, there are many config files, and you can change the location of a specific report in different file. Not easy at the first sight. You have to dig a little bit. In this config file, that is maybe the most important, I will show you where it is in a demo. You will find very important parameter. For example, you will find disable query execution report. If this is true, it means that your on-premise data gateway won't produce any logging. So it must be true in most of the time. Meshup log maximum number of files. This produces some logging about meshups that happens on your system, and you decide how many of them you are going to create. And maybe the most important, according to the previous slide, is the report file path. So you can define where to store all the logging system, all the log files. So you can decide a custom folder, as I told you. Again, strictly connected to the previous one, report file count. It's important to understand that the logging works as a first in, first out system. So you keep, let's say, 5 files. They will have a maximum size, and the system fills all the files, and the first in will be the first out and will be overwritten when you will reach the maximum amount of the file. And again, exactly, this is the other parameter that you can set up. It means the maximum size of a logging file. So you can decide where to store, how many of them, and how big a single file is. Again, another parameter that you can set up inside this file, this config file, is the query execution aggregation time in minutes. That means you can decide which is the time used by the system to automatically aggregate informations. I had an error on Teams. Are you there, guys? Can you hear me again? Can you see my screen, everything? Can you give my feedback in the chat or?
Yeah, everything is okay.
Thank you. I had an error, and as you can see, I switched to another camera. I don't know why. Anyway, let's go on. Okay, so I had query execution aggregation time in minutes. It means that, as I told you, the system counters are not in point in time. So you won't see a specific amount of RAM CPU at a specific second, but you will have an aggregation time. And you specify how many minutes you want to aggregate in order not to have too big files. And the same for the system and for the query execution. So aggregation time. Okay, so I have these log files. Maybe I placed them in a custom folder, and now I have to read them in Notepad, probably. Well, no, obviously not. What I was wondering when the customer came to us asking for a monitoring system, I was wondering if Microsoft maybe has already designed something about monitoring, since there are some standard logging system. And to be honest, they did something. If you go to this link with the QR code system, you will land in this page where you can find a PBIT Power BI template file that you can simply download and point to your custom location. So you can simply extract the logs in a folder using maybe the export logs from the OnPremises app, and you can point to them using this template. Pros of this solution is that it's obviously free because Microsoft supports this on their docs and gives you the possibility to download without any fee. It's very quick to install because you download it and you open without any problem. It's a Power BI template. Thank you very much, Olivier, for putting the link in the chat. And then it's obviously 100% compatible with all the Power BI gateways. So you can download this Power BI template and use it on all your customer because it's 100% compatible. It uses only the logs that you can extract from any gateway. By default, it allows to get some insights from the logging because it picks up the log files and then gives you some report out of the box. Some data had already been prepared in some way. You have some measures, some data application or something like that. Some preparation is already there. And probably you can give insights to Power BI teams without the need of the IT department. This was a problem in our customer because the IT department had the permission to connect to the gateway, but didn't have any knowledge about Power BI. So simply that department doesn't understand anything about Power BI, and those numbers has no sense for them. On the other way around, Power BI teams knows exactly what those numbers mean, but hadn't access to the gateway and to the logs. So there was a problem in sharing the access and the permission. Okay, so we have some pros on this solution, but we have a lot of cons, in my opinion. First of all, modeling is not okay at all. So you have you have no dimensions, you have facts completely unrelated, so difficulties to get facts related and get some insights, correlated insights also. Calendar is just a draft. As you can see here, it's just date with a date. There are no days, months, and so on. Nothing else that you have to build from scratch. Everything. You have no measures. So if you open up, you won't see any measure. There's no timetable, and it's very important if you are going to do some analysis and you know that there were some errors in a specific hour or in a couple of hours. You need to do some filters very quickly in a smart way, and without a timetable, it's very difficult with this approach. And to be honest, bad modeling yield to some bad reports. These are real numbers. So this is the Power BI template attached to our customer. And as you can see, it's very difficult to understand anything in this report. So probably this visual should give us the failure by error type, but it's quite difficult to read it. As you can see, there's a list of errors with a scroll bar, very small chart. Durations in the logs are saved in milliseconds, and in the reports there's no conversion at all, both in the model and in the report. So you end up with numbers like this. If you do an analysis over, let's say, 1 week or 2 weeks, you will see numbers like this that it's completely impossible to analyze. And obviously, charts like this, I don't know how we can analyze something really with charts like this. Completely impossible. So we decide to. And again, it appears it's still in draft, in my opinion, because you will find also a page like this, like data error, that is just a table, alpha table, more or less, listing logs in some way. So I don't know. The solution is it's a good way to start, but it's not ready to be delivered to a customer, or even if you are trying to work on it without showing anything to a customer. It's very difficult to get some very useful insights on this. So what we have done is to trying to leverage this solution. So we started from that idea, getting the data from the standard logging files, trying to add some values on top of that, leverage the standard solution. So the first idea was to create pages, create a Power BI report that shows the performance counter of our gateway machine by topic. So we divided the CPU informations in a specific page. We presented the RAM counters in another page, and we presented the disks counter in another page. So the user can easily understand which is the counter is analyzing and which is, and you can see a little bit better the values. And we will see in a demo how it works in reality. So CPU counters, what we have done from an improvement compared to the standard solution, first of all, we normalized the gateway CPU percentage. By default, the login system gives you numbers like 200, 300, 500 percentage. That it doesn't make sense if you think about it as a percentage, but it means that, for example, if you have 4 CPUs that are working at 100% each, you will see in the login system 400%. Yes, 400 without the percent system symbol. So with our solution, we tried to normalize the data in order to show 100% we normalize the data according to the number of CPUs and number of cores that you have in your system. We leveraged a counter selections because I'm going to show you that in the login system you will have many counters. So you can switch from one counter to another to understand the value in a specific amount of time. And from a RAM perspective, so from a RAM counters, what we have done, it's giving all the counters at a glance. So in a single view, you can see all the counters that the login system is providing you. And as a general pros, compared to the standard Power BI template, what we can do is to create a better look and feel for sure, because the actual is not usable at all. We can add other tables, other dimensions that are not already in the standard Power BI template, like extracting the data sources that are used during our refresh. So in this way, creating a dimension like data sources, you will be able to filter in your reports just the useful data sources that you want to analyze. For example, how many query I've sent to SQL Server, or a specific SQL Server instance, or a specific storage account. I can also leverage this approach, putting multiple gateways logging inside the same folder, and in this way you can filter from one gateway to another to have just one centralized monitoring solution. And obviously, as I told you, if you leverage date calendar table, adding many more columns, and you add a time dimension table to the standard modeling, you will have the possibility to slice and dice data and logging in a better way, because you will see the buckets, for example, the hour buckets, and you can select them. That is not possible in the standard solution. What I'm showing to you in this screenshots is 99% based on the standard login files. So you start with the standard login files and you build on top of them a solution like this that can be replicated on all the gateways that you have in your company or on your customers' premises. And you can build something like query distribution analysis, so you can identify the type of queries that you are going to receive. You can identify queries per day, for example, queries per hour, identifying patterns and trends on your gateways. I see a question from Christopher. What is the most common configuration, CPU and memory for a gateway? Well, it's we are consultants. We do IT consulting, and so our favorite answer is it depends. But obviously, in this case, it depends about your workload. And this kind of topic, so analyzing and monitoring the on-premise data gateways, it's useful to understand if your capacity plan on if the capacity plan that you have performed before installing it is okay. And to be honest, if you go to the on-premises data gateway doc page, you will see there are some advice from Microsoft, some minimum requirements to install, but there's not a maximum. To be honest, there's no a minimum also, because if you are simply supporting one query that picks just 10 rows from a SQL table, you could have just one CPU and 2 GB of RAM. It depends on the workload. And doing analysis like this will tell you exactly if you are if the capacity plan is okay or not. And again, it could change during the day, as you approach Power BI in your company, the capacity plan could become not correct or not aligned with your company needs, and you have to adjust it. Yes, it depends. Yes. I know that it's not, Christopher, I know it's not a real answer, but I hope I explained why it depends. It depends on the workload, the workload that you are supporting with that specific machine. For example, if you try to split the gateway into different machines, creating a cluster, and maybe creating an high availability cluster that does a load balancing, what was a configuration that wasn't that was too small for your workload become okay because you are splitting and duplicating the resources into different machines. So I hope this a little bit answer on your question. Again, when you have analyzed the patterns of your query, you can also dig a little bit. Okay. Yes, 5 times depends. Okay, I will try to do it. I think that I'm already at 3. It depends, probably in the same sentence. Okay, so we can analyze the query distribution, but we can also analyze the details of the query. So I know exactly which are the queries that I've run on my gateway and what was the average duration, for example, the max duration of that query, because I can see if that query had been done multiple times, and probably it's the case because when you refresh the data set, let's say daily, you know that daily you are going to redo the same queries. And in this case, you can see which is the duration of some queries, how much, how does it take to process the data for your query. And analyzing this data is very useful in order to understand if you are adding some calculated columns, for example, that are heavy to be calculated, evaluated before closing, let's say, the model. And you can also have some insights about the error. So if you have some common errors, for example, with this bitmap here, and a very simple list of the records, for example. So some insights about the queries that you are running on your system. And as I told you, you can simply add a data source dimension to understand which are the data source that you are querying, and to do some specific analysis, slicing and dicing the logging just for that specific data source. Error log analysis is just a list of all the logs that we have, and the possibility to filter just for errors and to see which was the error on that specific query, for example. So I can search by request ID, I can search by query tracking ID, because each request can give us many queries, for example, and slice and dice the log as I want, obviously. Okay, so I think that we have talked enough. So let's go for some demo right now. Let's see. let's see. Let's start. Okay. Okay. Prepare the virtual machine here. Okay. I'm just opening an on-premise data gateway. So this is an installation of an on-premise data gateway. And the first thing I want to show you is the famous possibility to download the logs from the on-premises hub. So I don't know why it's logged out, but let's do it again together. So I'm opening the on-premise data gateway app. Okay. That's long. Oh, come on. And then we will see the multi-factor authentication. Okay. So as soon as you are logged into the on-premises data gateway app, you will see this this application that gives you some more information, and you have the diagnostics tab where you have the export log button. If you click the export logs, the application will pick up all the logs from all their location, even if you haven't set up a custom location, as I told you before. You will see a zip file. By default, I find it in the desktop file, in desktop on the desktop. So as you can see, it's a collection of all the logs that you have in the system, and it's not very easy to read as they are. And obviously this is a manual process, so if you have to go here and do the export logs, it's a manual process that is not very useful if you want to create a standard monitoring system. So you have to get rid of this manual process, choosing exactly a custom location. So for example, I created in my temp folder a gateway folder, and I can configure on-premises data gateway to write all the logs here. So I know exactly that I will find the logs only in this folder. So how can I do this? If you remember the previous one of the previous slides, you will you have to dig a little bit to understand where all the logs are configured. I will show you one of them, and you will find the slides on my GitHub repo, and you will see all the locations for all the others. But it's pretty simple. So you will navigate into the on-premises data gateway folder, installation folder, that it's typically under the C drive in program files, and you will see some configuration file that I have here. For example, you can open up this one. This is the most important, the gateway core DLL config, and it contains one parameter that is called report file. If you remember, I told you that, let's see if I need to do some magnifier. So if you remember, I told you that there are some important parameters. Can you see Christopher right now with magnifier? Do you think it's okay right now? Okay, thank you very much. As you remember, in one of the first slides, I told you that there are some very important parameters here, and you can see them here. The report file path, for example, is where you configure where to store the logs. And when you restart the service, you know that this is the house of your logs files. Then you can say how many of them to store. So as you remember, it's a rolling logging that is first in, first out logging. So you decide how many log file for each category do you want to store. And for example, which is the sizing, because maybe you are going to store them in the C drive and you don't want to be too big because they are going to fill out the C drive. So this is the location where you can configure the output. And I suggest you to look at other parameters that you can find here. For example, in the documentation app, let me go to the top. Here there's a very interesting part of documentation that explains you how to set up a parameter that is called Meshup default pool container max count. That it defines how many Meshup containers are opened by the gateway on this machine according to the number of CPUs that you have on the gateway. So if you start suffering some problems on refreshing dataset, this is something that you can look at and see if it's configured in the right way according to the number of CPUs that you have here. So this is a very important config file that have many important things to look at. Okay, so this is the first place where you define, for example, the place for your loggings. And let me show you. If you remember, I told you that the solution that I was presenting to you is 99% compatible with all the gateways. What does it mean, 99%? It means that if you look at the zip file that will be produced by the standard logging, you will see a gateway properties txt file. Let's see if I can open it. And let's do a zoom a little bit. Okay, you will see some information here, but you won't see any number of CPUs or the amount of RAM that is available on the gateway. So in our solution, what we have done is to simply add, let me show you this, in the temp gateway. Gateway properties, JSON. Let's see if it works. Yes, that's one. What we have added is just the number of CPUs that we have on this at this moment on the server, the environment, if we want to tag the environment that is related to this gateway, and the amount of RAM. So this is the only thing that we have added to the standard logging system. Just a few information to be presented inside the inside our reports. So according to this, let's look at some logging system, some files from the logging system. So the most important are the system counter aggregation reports and the query reports. If you open up the system counter aggregation report, you will see that you have some information about the gateway object ID. So in each log file, you will get the ID of the gateway. And this is interesting because you can have many gateways writing in the same folder, and you can manage, you know exactly which log belongs to which gateway. thanks to the gateway object ID. And then you have, for the system counter aggregation report, you have the start time and the end time. So you know exactly which is the time frame you have this measure for a specific counter. So for example, from 1050 to 1055, the gateway memory in kilobytes will add a maximum value. This is the maximum value, this is the minimum value, and this is the average value. And this is true for all the counters that are standardly persisted in this log. So you have information about the gateway memory, so the memory used by the gateway, the system memory, so the memory that was allocated by all the application, so the gateway and all the other application, the gateway CPU, so you know exactly which is the gateway, the CPU used by the gateway and by the system, all the applications. And you have all this information here for the aggregation time that you can specify in the configuration file that we have seen together a few moments ago. Using this information, what we can reach? Something like this report that is showing the CPU usage of our gateway. So as you can see, I can simply switch from system CPU percentage to gateway CPU percentage. And I can see that in some moments, I reached some peaks. I had some peaks on my gateway. And this is interesting because at this time, I can start thinking that I haven't enough CPUs to support my workload if I see too many peaks at this 100%. And if I start suffering some throttling in the refresh and I see many peaks at 100%, I can say probably I haven't enough CPUs to support the actual workload, probably. It's very important to see if the amount of CPUs used by the system, it's backed by a very high use of the gateway. How can I do this? I can simply switch to the gateway CPU percentage and see if there are peaks on the gateway service. So this counter is analyzing how many, which is the amount of CPU used by the gateway itself. And as you can see, there's a peak that's aligned with the system. So in this moment, in this specific moment, I had probably a refresh that made a peak in our CPU utilization. But the other peak to 100%, it's not backed by a refresh because the gateway in that moment wasn't doing anything or very basic activity just to be active, just to be on. And this is a case where you can understand if there are other applications maybe installed on the gateway that are affecting your refresh. If you see and the utilization of your gateway, if you see many peaks that are not really related to the gateway refresh, probably there are other applications doing some other stuff, and probably you should try to remove those applications or move somewhere else. Obviously, you can also give to your users of this kind of solutions some advice about what they are seeing, because it's not always easy to remember what you are seeing. So you are going to see system CPU percentage, so the use of the system, and the gateway CPU percentage. That means how much CPUs are using the gateway. The same can be done by the RAM. So I can look at the RAM allocation. So I can see the amount of RAM used by the service itself and the Meshup engine. So you know that anytime you perform a refresh, perform some queries using the gateway, you are going to create on the gateway some Meshup containers. These containers do the transformation that you defined in Power Query, and the memory used by those Meshup containers must be summed up to the gateway memory in order to understand how much memory I'm using on the gateway. So on this chart, I can see which is the memory, the amount of memory allocated in a specific moment. And I can see that probably on this gateway is enough because I'm always below the 50%. But I can also understand how much memory is used by the gateway and all the Meshup containers that I'm creating during my refresh. This is useful again for understanding the capacity plan. So you can see some trends. So if you see that RAMs, the usage of RAM and CPU increase time by time, you know that probably the workload is becoming bigger, okay? And the same obviously for the disks. You can see the amount of disks, the amount of megabytes that had been read and written by the gateway during the time. And I'm not a storage expert, so for me, this kind of information are only some numbers that I can share with storage people that can tell me if they are okay, if this storage is okay with their with this IO or not. And this is something that we can share with them. Exactly, Benny. It's always a problem of the storage. Again, I can do some query distribution analysis because I can verify which are the queries, how they are distributed during the weeks, for example, because during the weekend I have no query at all, and I can see that I have most of the time less than 1,000 queries, but I had some peaks on specific days. And this is important if you are analyzing some problems that your user found out. And they said, hey, on the October the 26th, we had some issues, some slowness in the refresh. And you can say, hey, you did some more work than expected. We had some heavy workload compared to other days, for example. And you can obviously track which are the hours where you hit more queries. This is something that you can look into the standard logging system again. So you have 3 other files, as I told you. The first one is query start report, that is telling you which is the gateway again, which is the request ID, and which are the data source and the tracking ID for the query. So you know exactly which is the data source that has been called, which is the query that has been generated by the engine when it started, and what was the query type. So if it was the refresh or a direct query query. With this report, you can also have some other information, because with the query execution report, you have, let's say, you have more details about all the queries that you have run, because you will have again gateway object ID. You will get again the data source, request ID, query tracking ID, query execution and time, but you will get also the duration. You will get serialization, spooling, and all the other information that you can pick up in order to understand if you have problems on specific queries. For example, for the duration and the processing, you get all the information needed here in this standard logging file. And So you have the starting in the start report, you have many more information in the query execution, but you have also an aggregation report that maybe it's not so useful if you analyze the other two files, but it gives you a lighter way of analyzing because it automatically aggregates by timing that you have defined in the configuration file, and it aggregates by the success and the data source. So in this way, you can see how many times you are hitting a specific data source with success or not, and the timing average and max that you have eaten, that you have hit by this query. So all these standard files gives you something like this: the possibility to understand patterns in the distribution and picking up the data sources. So you can filter, for example, just for queries hitting a specific SQL server or query hitting a specific file in a folder, in a storage account, or anything else. And you can see information about data duration, and query processing using the detailed information that you will find in the standard log. In the end, if you look at all those logs, you can pick up all the request ID and query ID for all your for all the queries on the gateway. This means that you can search, and this is useful when you get the errors, the standard errors from the Power BI portal. You get the request ID or the query tracking ID, and you can search for those results, for those IDs directly into the search bar. And as you can see, one request ID can give us many queries. And I can look at, for example, which are the details of that specific query, which is the duration of that query, which is the processing time for that query, and which was the data source for that query. And maybe my preferred page is the support page, because it means that you can add something that you are going to remember. And for example, I have added this ranking for the logging, the standard logging system. Full star means that this log file is very important for you. So the query execution aggregation, query start, system counter aggregation, very important logging, as I told you. And since I cannot remember always where they are located by default, I always put a reminder for me and for my colleagues, for my IT departments that are not very familiar with Power BI probably. I simply remember them where they are. And again, the table that I've pasted in the slides help us to understand which are the pattern name. So any log file has its own file pattern name that is very known, and the description that help us to remember what I can find in a specific log. So to wrap up everything, it's very important to remember that if you install a gateway, a lot of traffic will flow through the gateway, and probably the gateway, when it's installed thinking to a specific workload that could be sometime not the real workload that you are going to face. Probably is oversized, or probably is not enough to support the workload that you are going to face maybe in few months. So having something that gives you a quick insight about the pressure on the resources like CPU, RAM, disks, and something that gives you an insight about the distribution of the queries that you are supporting with that gateway could be important to continuously validating your infrastructure and your gateway. Okay. I'm looking at a question from, okay, Benny, how feasible would it be to extend this for multiple clusters, to have a single app, or you can iterate over the different clusters and easily choose which of you want to go into details? Yes, that's something that is perfectly fine and supported. I mean, each, let's see. Each logging systems, each logging standard logging file has its own gateway object ID. That is the object, the gateway, the ID that identifies that instance or that gateway instance. So if you put all the files in the same folder, you can import all the files inside one single report, and you can switch from one gateway to another, because all the other files that refers to a gateway maintain this gateway object. So it's perfectly fine to have multiple gateways inside the same monitoring solution. And it's something that I haven't implemented yet on customers, because in those cases I have only one gateway, but it's something that is supported.
Riccardo, it seems that we have got another question as well. It seems Lotus asking if there's any way to just a question that the Power BI service or Power BI gateway can queue refreshes to avoid overloading the gateway. Is that correct? Is there any way to monitor it?
Service can queue refresh to avoid overloading the gateway. Is that correct? Can we monitor that somewhere? I don't think we can monitor this in some way.
Not through the gateway, I think.
No.
Because if the service is going to throttle the refresh, then
Exactly.
it's a matter of comparing refresh schedules and actual refresh times.
Yes, I think this is related to the way the data movement service writes into the Azure Service Bus. Probably is how it writes there in order to go to the refresh. So it's something that you haven't an eye on that part of the architecture, I think.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, Chris is also making a remark. If he understands correctly, it's more like an analyzing tool rather than monitoring the gateway.
I would answer to the second part of the sentence in advance. Is saying we export the logs and then search where the problem could be. In reality, the objective of configuring the gateway in the right way, not to write on standard folders, but pointing to custom folder, means you are not going to extract anything. So the logging system that is there by default will produce file in a custom folder that you can point with any tool you want. So you are not going to extract anything. And the first part is, to be honest, I don't see the difference between, let's say, analyzing tool or monitoring tool. let's see, you have something that monitors the resource of your gateway, for example. So you can use the VMware applications that does for more or less the same as this process, because the VMware application or your appliance will tell you which is the amount of resources used by the gateway or another virtual machine at a specific moment. And you open up an application that tells you this value. This is the same. You are opening up an application that reads the data from log files and tells you which are the values. So it's both, I think. Monitoring for what concerns the resources and an analyzing tool for what concerns identifying patterns, identifying query distribution, and if you have errors, you will see which are the queries that are getting you the errors. But I don't know, it's something that is very, I don't know how to say, it's slightly different, I think. I don't know.
Okay, thanks. Then we also have got someone who is asking if the Power BI template files that you have modified are also available on your Git account.
No, this Power BI file is not available on the GitHub. Anyway, it's not difficult to build something like this if you have any basic understanding of logging system. You can build your own logging system, monitoring system based on the standard logging system as I tried to describe it on this session.
Yep. Okay, cool. Then we've got another question from Chris. Is there any way to go live monitor the gateway connection in such a way that you get notified when an on-prem gateway and/or data source is not reachable?
Okay, this is an interesting question, and for example, I remember a post from Mark, an MVP from the Netherlands, that shows you how to create a way of monitoring the if a gateway is reachable or not using, for example, Logic App. So it's doing something like a polling or a ping, a continuous ping on the virtual machine, and using Logic App, it gets a notification when the gateway is not available. I think that there are many ways of doing this. This is just one example. Let me see if I can find it.
I've got it.
You got it, Benny?
Yep.
Okay. So this is an example. Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's exactly what I was referring to. In this way, you are notified if the gateway is down, for example, and probably you can build in many ways. This is just one. And for what concerns the data source that is not reachable, let's see. Also, in this way, there are many ways of designing this. It depends on which is the. I think that it depends on what do you want to use as a front end, let's say. Because if you want to have Power BI as your front end, like doing an alert system or sending you an alert on a dashboard, for example, you have to build something that queries multiple times the data source. And this isn't something that you can build. For sure, it's not something in import mode, because you have some you have a limited number of refresh in import mode, and it won't be live. So it should be something in direct query or live connection. In direct query, obviously.
Okay, thanks. Interesting. I'm not very sure, but at this moment there are no more questions. So, Riccardo, thank you very much for this interesting session.
Thank you guys for having me. It's been a pleasure. I hope that you find it a little bit useful in case.